It is. As Kathy said, I've been looking at the Civil War and trying to put together information. Um, if anybody remembers, I don't remember where, but I know that Elder Tess at one point in time brought up civil wars and um, said that they're hard to define, and that is true. And that I think she made a comment that they were that was hard to distinguish between Civil War and Revolution. And I think through this book I'm reading, I found a little bit of a distinction that might help with that as we go through this. So since this was kind of last minute, I have been working on this for supposed to be in 2 weeks, and I just didn't have the notes and quotes really properly ordered, which I'm not usually that orderly anyway. So we'll see how it goes. The book is called Civil Wars, and you'll see that in the notes when I pull them up, called Civil Wars. It's a history of ideas, and I have the author, and I'll show all that in a few minutes. But we're going to go through, hopefully I do this well. We're going to go through, do a share screen, and we might do some on the board. We'll see. I wasn't quite ready with the board. Okay, so you can probably see the screen now, the file. And what's kind of directed me here is, really looking at Revelation 17, the woman being an entity with an ideology. And in Revelation 17, there's a bad woman. We know that then there, by contrast, there has to be a good woman. We know we find her in Revelation 12. So I believe that then that means that the two different women have two different ideologies. So we're going to start just looking at a breakdown of the monarchies, republic, and democracy, and we'll go into why as we go through this. So when it comes to a monarchy, they are generally hereditary, inherited positions, and go through that chain that way. And then they also their source of power is tradition, by divine right, or by constitution. And can a monarchy be a democracy? And the answer is yes. And the example of the UK and Japan. Can a monarchy be a republic? And the answer is no. So when you go to look at a republic, the head of state is elected or appointed, and it's non-hereditary. The source of power is the people, constitution, or rule of law. And can it be a democracy? Yes, a republic can be a democracy, and the United States is an example of that, as well as Germany. And can it be a republic? Yes. Can democracy be a republic? I hope I got that right. So then when you go to democracy, it's elected by the people, directly or indirectly. The source of power is the citizenry, or rule by the people. Can it be a democracy? Doesn't NA is on that one. So, and then same thing, can it be a republic? So a republic can be both democracy and a republic, but a monarchy cannot be a republic, if that made sense. So we'll go with that and try to explore some of this, because when you go to I'm working on these notes for two different well, probably multiple purposes, but two main ones is Babylon, that great city, which would take you back to the beginning, the kingdom of Babylon. And I'll toss this out there, the suggestion. Remember, we're talking ideas, not facts. This is going to be history, not facts, and not application. I don't mean not facts, history and not application. So when you look at Babylon, Babylon would take, Revelation 17 would take you back to the very beginning. We know that with the study of the statue, it's the kingdoms of the world. And so in the beginning, Babylon was actually, we're not going to go into this part, I'm just going to mention it, was the city of Babylon, the actual city of Babylon, which was the center of their government for the empire, for the Babylonian Empire. So we're going to take and look at the fourth kingdom, and that would be Rome, and that's the Iron Kingdom. And so how Rome went from a monarchy from its very beginnings, from a very bloody start, to then a republic, and then back to an empire, or I think empire is the same thing as a monarchy because they did go to dictators, um, and which would be very similar. So interrupt me or message in the chat if you have comments or questions, if I can answer it. If I can't, I won't. Um, so
Elaine,
ancient Rome, go ahead.
yeah, good morning. Could you just enlarge it a bit, please?
Sure.
Thank you.
I didn't want to make it that big for this part so that you could see it all at once. So sorry, meant to change that. A little better?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, okay. So Rome, that Iron Kingdom, we know that Rome is the kingdom that is left unnamed, but many symbols through Daniel 2, 7, 8, going into 11, and then also when you move into Revelation, it gives they're repeat and enlarged until you can develop this understanding. So Rome is the Iron Kingdom, that would be the legs, and then it becomes the iron and clay, which would be, from what we understand in the fifth kingdom, would be religion. So this is going to be mostly on the earlier part of Rome. So in ancient Rome, you had the distinction in the classes, the, hope I say this right, the patricians, the wealthy aristocratic, sorry, upper class who held most political power, while the plebeians were the common citizens, the farmers, the merchants, and the artisans. The patricians originally held a monopoly on power, but a long conflict known as the struggle of the orders gradually led to the plebeians gaining more rights and political representation. Some of these are from AI, and I did note that where I did it, or Wikipedia. And then also we're going to read some things out of the book that I've been reading. And so the plebeians, they were the common citizens, the majority of the population. Their wealth varied. They basically initially had no political power. That came to change somewhat. And there was a struggle for rights. They fought for political equality through protests and strikes, leading to establishment of their own representatives and laws. So when it came to civil war, um, we'll see it as we go through some of the quotes that I put together. But a civil war is a war of the citizens, basically within a city. So in the book, he goes through why Greece what Greece did not go as far to call it a civil war. They had some family battles, things like that, but not to where in Rome it came down to the Rome actually marching with a war with an army against Rome. And that's where you find the first use. The Romans were the first ones to use the term civil war, though they were sketchy about using it. And I'm still yet to fully understand that. But they didn't like actually using that phrase. So the plebeians constituted the majority of the Roman citizens after a series of political conflicts and equalization. Although patricians are often represented as rich and powerful families who managed to secure power over the less fortunate plebeian families, plebeians and patricians among the senatorial class were often equally wealthy. So as civil rights for plebeians increased during the middle and late Roman Republic, many plebeian families had attained wealth and power, while some traditionally patrician families had fallen into poverty and obscurity. So you have two classes of people. You have basically the nobility and then the common people. And you're in this period of time now where the first monarchy of Rome is gone and it's now a republic because citizens had fought for their rights. What I have kind of found, or if anybody wants to read the book, I think it's worth it, because I'm not going to be able to rightly define things. A lot of it is the thoughts that I come to with what I have read so far, and I haven't finished it. And it's broken into I think three sections. and I've finished the part on the history of Rome, and then it goes into the history of Europe and the European kings, and and then I believe it goes into then more current history. He is we're going to go through it now where he's from. It's David Armitage is the author, a British historian, and he's also part of Harvard. It says that he's been on the chair of history department, Lloyd C. Blankfein, professor of history at Harvard University. So that's where the book comes from, and I did put the link in there, and I can share the notes that takes you to that. And there are some PDFs to some of his writings, but not to this particular book. I just found that on the Harvard site. It would have been nice to have that as a PDF. So he goes through and shows civil war as a war between the citizenry, and it's often based on ideas like what you would see with monarchy versus republic, or what can develop based on the two classes of citizens, your nobility and your common people. So, and it looks much like revolutions with subtle differences. And I'll share my thoughts on what that subtle difference is in a minute. And he looks back to Rome, where the term was first used. It's where perceived ideas get introduced to bring enough discord where Rome actually fought Rome. They fought against themselves. And we'll go through a couple of note a couple of those histories that brought them back to an empire, because 27 AD is, we know, is a part of this history. So I don't know where that's going to look like in the recording, but we apologize for losing there for just a second. But we'll pick up where we left off. That this actually culminates, this war of ideas come in, these different ideas and come in, and they eventually culminate in enough discord and animosity to where Rome fights Rome. If you're co-host, you can go ahead and mute somebody, I believe, for me. I got it. I got it. But just in case, you can watch that for me too, just in case. Okay. So it culminates in warm fighting Rome, and eventually the fall of the Republic, and the Republican then transitions back into an empire, which I don't know if anybody knows, is there a difference between a monarchy and an empire, but and I haven't gone into that, but it takes you to the Battle of Actium. And from what I found, the Battle of Actium is actually 31 BC. And then when Augustus takes his title, I believe it is when it is 27. So there are subtle this is my thought, if I'm understanding this, the overall desire is to return from a republic to a monarch, but it's subtle, deceptive, where people don't see where it leads. That's what I picked up out of between what we look like today, what we've been learning about today, and also looking back at this history. It's something that goes on among the citizenry, but it seems the overall goal is to take the power from the people and put it back into that one power, authoritarian monarchy, dictator, etc. So that's a thought of mine.
Really cool. I don't know that I knew that, Elaine.
Yeah, well, it's my thought. I can't say that it's right, but that's what I get out of reading the book. So here's
just for clarification, what you get from reading out of the book, what I said I never heard was that it was amongst the citizenry the same way it is. Can you repeat that?
Yeah, the battle is a battle between the citizenry and the classes of citizenry, and so often based on ideas. So within the citizenry, you have the nobility, and then you have the common people, and the nobility do not want the people, the common people, to have power. And in a republic, the common people have power. So you see this battle that eventually breaks out to where Rome marches on Rome, and the slow process of turning it back into a monarchy is what happens. in that process. I hope that helped.
That's really good. Thank you for repeating it. It was very clear. And when you were talking about it, I couldn't help but think of Trump won his first presidency, and when he was going in down there with the Bible and all that, and brought the I don't remember what branch of the service. I think it was Miley. Was it General Miley? I can't remember. And he told him to shoot him in the legs. Why can't you just shoot him in the legs? Right? Um, kind of similar. I was just seeing how little early things we saw that sound exactly like, what you were saying.
Yeah.
So
Well,
thank you.
yeah, you're welcome. This is looking at that, what we see in Daniel 2 as the fourth kingdom. It eventually becomes the fifth. And we know that the Rome comes in two phases, and the United States comes in two phases. So
Cool.
if the United States is going to repeat the fifth head, then I thought good to look at the whole issue of Rome, and this is where it eventually led me. So these are some of the quotes, and there's a whole lot more, but I kind of found this last night, last minute, that I did not have some of these quotes put together. So bear with me, and hopefully that makes sense as we go through it. So this was on page 45 of the book. Again, the book is called Civil Wars: A History of Ideas. And I will share the notes so that you'll have the reference for the book as well. So the Romans were well aware that their own internal dissensions were different, horrifyingly so, from those suffered by the Greeks, because he does a little bit of comparison about, did the Greeks ever have civil war? So the Greeks never spoke of a political war. It was almost literally inconceivable in Greek. The Romans alone would bear the guilt of inventing civil war and of learning how to tell its stories and determining what its history meant. That was from page 45. And just to mention, the author goes through many historians that carried this through. And the thing that's a challenge for me is I'm really slow to be able to comprehend some things. And so this is where bias and all that Elder Tess taught us really comes is a value to not have your biases, because some of these authors, some of these historians, some of these poets were pro-monarchy or pro-citizen, and that depended on how that made a difference in how they would record through their histories, through their writings, and through their poetry. So it's really hard sometimes to pick up and discern, for me anyways, the who's saying what, and why they're saying what they're saying. So it's really important to kind of understand each one of these people that and what their biases are, to try to determine where they're coming from. So this was page 46. Romans could also turn to the early history of their own Commonwealth. Every kind of political violence studied that history. Murders and assassinations, tumults and seditions, conspiracies and uprisings, every kind, that is, except for civil war. Most of these early disturbances took place within the citizen body, but none of them had risen to the level of outright war. This absence reinforced the argument that civil war was not only something peculiar to Rome, but something altogether new in history. So there were battles that were among the citizenry, and in Greece as well, but it was in Rome itself, in the Iron Kingdom, where it finally came to where a city marched on itself, or a citizenry, within the citizenry, a battle. So the next one here is from page 47. Among Roman historians and poets, the expulsion of Rome's last king, Tarquinius, Superbus, at the turn of the 5th century BCE, had seemingly provided some atonement for the shame of its very founding. That overthrow, achieved without violence, so you went from a bloody kingdom, for it became, when it is beginnings, and some use that he does mention the myth of Romulus and Remus, and actually refers back to that as the first civil war. But using it as a myth. And I don't know, I've never looked into Romulus and Remus that much to find out if they are myth or true. But so they started out with this bloody overturning to become, when Rome first came on the scene, it was very brutal and very bloody. But when it transitioned into a republic, which is what he's showing here, that overthrow achieved without violence allowed the blood-stained city to be founded anew as a republic, literally the people's business, or the Commonwealth, shared in by all its citizens. Rome now had the chance to become what Livy is called, and this is another one of the authors he's referring to, called a free nation in peace and war, a political community that showed greater obedience to the commands of law than those of men. Citizens were only truly free when they lived in a free commonwealth. Their liberty depended on that of the republic, I would say, republic itself.
Elaine,
I have a,
Yeah.
oh, go ahead.
it's just I was just trying to find a spot before you got too far. Romulus and Remus is a myth, and I had to learn that in grade school history class. They actually taught that because the population of Rome, that's like their mascot, sort of like the bald eagle or whatever. Romulus and Remus were brothers, and you'll probably have seen the statue of like a wolf with big suckling breasts, and the brothers suckle at the wolf's breasts. I can't remember the whole story, but I think they were like, that was like their mother. And so they build that big, like, animalistic, like man description of men through that, like, because it's like part wolf, right? Part human. Supposedly they started Rome, and it's, yeah, just mythology.
Yeah, okay. At this juncture, I didn't see the need to go back and look at that, but thank you for sharing that. But just to note that it did start out, and when it became the first monarchy, it was very bloody, and this was going into the republic was more kind of giving it. I can't think of the right word. Atonement for its bloody start. Okay. So the first Civil War, this is what I started looking at last week, and you can look this up. He talks about it in the book, but you can also look up YouTube videos that will help you with this. This first Civil War was in 88 to 82 BCE during Sulla. It might be spelled Sullah. You'll find it different spellings. So it was a brutal conflict in the late Roman Republic between the conservative general, he was the Optimate, and the populist faction led by Marius and Cinna, marking a turning point where generals marched armies on Rome, setting precedents for future civil wars like Caesar's. Sulla won and became a dictator. He enacted major Senate reforms, strengthening it and weakening the tribunes, and then surprisingly resigned, though his actions fatally weakened Republican norms. So it's kind of beginning the process of getting to where you are 27 AD. And so you had the Optimates, or the aristocratic, or the populist people. So you had political rivalry, control of the military commands, especially against the Mithridates was back in the East, because he went and did battles back there and then came back, and Rome fought on Rome. So the first march on Rome was 88. He was denied command, marched his legions into Rome, and it was a shocking breach of tradition. Because remember, at this time, Rome is still a republic, but now you have the first Roman army marching on Rome, and it's over this class divide between the nobility and the common people, the Commonwealth. So then the Second War was 83 to 82. Sulla returned to Rome, crushed the younger Marius's forces at the Battle of the Colline Gate, and took the city. So there's a link there that you'll see if you want to look him up. But there are, like I said, there are also a lot of YouTube videos you can find with him. I don't know if Kathy made it back on. Anybody see that? I don't think she made it back on. I don't see her. Must be having trouble. So these are just some, huh?
I
You
don't
don't
see
see
her
her?
on. No.
Okay. So this next section here in my notes are, and I don't think I'm going to be able to read from them all, but I'll try to put together more of them to share as we go through. But let me try to get a couple of them. I just made notes of them because I was literally having to type this up last night. And it just continues to go through this history to show that this battle between the classes. So this one is going to be page 50, from page 56. And I'm not gonna be able to paraphrase, but I won't be able to go into who each person is because he uses a lot of historians and poets. And off the top of my head now, because I wasn't prepared so much for this today, I won't be able to say who's who, except for a few cases maybe. So as Appian forcefully notes, when Marius and it says Sulpicius had confronted Sulla on his way to the forum, there took place a struggle between political enemies, which was the first conducted in Rome, not under the guise of civil dissension, but nakedly as a war, complete with trumpets and military standards. In this way, the episodes of civil strife escalated from rivalry and contentiousness to murder, and from murder to full-scale war. And this was the first army composed of Roman citizens to attack their own country as if it were a hostile power. The moment marked the arrival of civil war as an event, not just an idea. So that was from page 56. So you have marking the beginning or the first civil war with Sulla. And it's based on this class distinction and we can look at it just in the terms of our own current history. When you go through the civil rights movement or the 60s, civil rights, second wave feminism, and Stonewall, you see the people are fighting for rights. And during the Sixth Kingdom, that's one of the things that is happening under the Constitution. It's a republic and a democracy, and the people you're having to work their way. From Revelation 13, we see that it's a lamb first, and then speaks like a dragon. So although there is a really ugly history of some of the founding fathers as well, it still was, as Elder Parmenter had pointed out, it was still a good kingdom. The purpose of a kingdom or purpose of a king was to do good. And it depends on what ideology is going to control it to determine what it is. So you had this fight in the United States for rights, and then you wind up with a backlash, if everybody remembers that. Some of you read the book Backlash as well. So, and then from page 57, the first was the idea that the war takes place within the boundaries of a single political community. And for me, I kind of eventually go to, in my notes, the thoughts and ideas to be discussed, not all today, but future, is that in Revelation 17, Babylon is that great city that rules over the kings of the earth. It's a city. So we'll keep that in the back of our mind. So the Romans also knew that there should be at least two contending parties in a civil war, one with a legitimate claim of authority over that community. So there had to be one that had the authority over the community. So page 78, let's see, I think I want to go skip a couple. Go to 88, because it gave a couple of points that I wanted to get to, where it talks about they want to restore the monarchy. So that talked about there was three, in page 88, it talks about there being three narratives, and we're going to focus on just one of them. There's three narratives that they have that comes from this discussion on the war. The first was the first was that it might be called the Republican story, sympathetic to the supposedly selfless civic values of the Roman Republic. The second, let me see if I can go. Then there was an imperial narrative that followed much the same trajectory, but reached a very different conclusion. Civil war was a persistent disease of the body politic, and it had only one cure: the restoration of monarchy or the exaltation of an emperor. So they believed in this imperial narrative, this would be three different ways of bias, I guess you would say, of looking at it, that civil war was the cause, and the best cure for civil war was to return to a monarchy. In other words, monarchy, they would teach that monarchy brings peace, whereas people, the common citizens having rights, is what causes the wars. So that's what I got out of that. And then it
Wonder
had
if they agitated, if Rome, the ruling powers, did the agitation within the society, you know, the aristocracy, because we've always had those like class levels, and so that because the people, so it would look like the people were the problem, because it would be the people that would rebel. So then they can pull in the answer that, okay, well, if we just have one person, then we can stop all this. I wonder if, you know, the government maneuvered it like we're seeing today. I don't know that you would know that answer, but it's very interesting, all the comparisons you've brought out.
So,
Yeah.
can you hear me?
Yes, I can. I saw you there now.
Okay. Okay, good. The restart worked. So, I think that was a good point, Elaine and Susan. It seems like a common pattern throughout history that those in power want to keep the power.
Yes.
And then we'll have a narrative to fit that. And then make the ones fighting for their rights the bad guys, the disruptors of Israel, of Rome. You know what I mean? That seems like a repeated pattern.
I completely agree. And I was
Which eventually takes you to see the difference, the subtleties between civil war and revolution. So go ahead, Susan, and then I'll continue on.
well, I was even thinking, you know, because a lot of these, I don't know if they're principles, but a lot of these shenanigans, I don't know what word to use, that we see pulled repeatedly like a pattern, like we've been discussing. If you think of like, well, it pops into my mind when the gay LGBTQ issue was being agitated back in the day. I can't remember offhand right now the year. But when it was being agitated, the media would always show, okay, some of the transvestites are kind of like, they look really flamboyant, like some of them do, like the drag show divas that are doing it for um, entertainment. It's more entertainment, it's more for show. Back when they had Finocchios in San Francisco, that was a big deal, and straight couples went there. It was funny, it was campy, it was meant to be a satire, and it would be like the, you know, all men uh, doing a big show, being, and they were women. They would be pretend they were women, and so the media would always show the most caricature-like examples of what was in that crowd of LGBTQ people. They would always show the most loudest, like the sisters Boom Boom, the ones that wore those big coronets that pretend they're nuns that ride like Harleys. If anyone knows what I'm talking about, they're really wild and risque, and they wear like fishnet stockings and put their leg out on the motorcycle, but they've got like those old-fashioned like coronet hats that with points on them. Anyhow, and so that the public would get this idea that all, how we stereotype, they always choose something really out there on one of the extremes to agitate the public. And I was thinking about that with what you were saying too with the classes, because one brief comment, because have you noticed? I don't know if anyone's noticed this. And probably the only reason it came to my attention is because my mother had an eye for tailoring, and her mom and dad owned a dry cleaners, and my grandma Rose, her mom, used to mend and darn men's expensive tweed suits, and they would come from all over because my grandma Rose knew how to go from the inside of the material, get the threads. She'd pull the threads out bit by bit, and then she would go to the front and she would weave them in so that you'd never know that man had a cigarette burn in the front of that expensive coat, right? But my mom, because of growing up with watching those details, she always recognized fabrics and cuts and tailorings. And she told me, she would tell me about the old rich, old money, people with old money, and how you wouldn't know old money. Because she would take me to restaurants when I was the last kid around, right? Thinking she'll show me, what the world is like a little bit and how to have manners in a nice restaurant. And so she would tell me that they dress down. Because I'm like, are movie stars here? And she's like, no, you wouldn't even notice the rich people because they're not flashy. They're not pretentious in that manner in public. They just kind of go about kind of wanting not people to know they're that rich. Where today, the rich, they wear like clothes just like us, like jeans and t-shirts, blah blah blah, right? But if you priced the t-shirt, it'd be like, $800 because it's made of, I don't know, Egyptian cotton or what, but it just looks like a regular old t-shirt. So they're very aware and very conscious, and they very much try to avoid what we saw during the Gilded Age, because during the Gilded Age, that's a great example of showing classes, even how they dress, how they entered buildings, through the poor went through the back, right? Blah, blah, blah. So today, they just the new rich aren't as flashy. Yeah, some still are. But I thought that was really interesting that they wear jeans. And if you look at like Bezos and others, you'll see him look just like he's got on casual. But if you were to know how much he paid, it was a fortune.
Thank you. Thank you for that. There are a lot of parallels in the different things that are happening in here. And it does come down to, in that history as well as this history, is the bias of who the poet is, who the historian is, and what their biases were. And continuing on that thought of the restoration of the monarchy, he has a quote in here that people's rule must give place. So the people must give up, and the prince's power must prevail. And then it goes into the Christian narrative, which I won't go into for this purpose of this study. So he then goes on to talk about readers of the classical texts would understand their own internal power struggles in terms inherited from the Romans. They would learn the meaning of civil war from the Latin they read in school and at university, ensuring the inherited view formed their thinking from the earliest opportunity. So these historians would help to also shape and form, even today, our views, but this is going into the history of when you leave Rome and you come into the history of I would say the Fifth Kingdom. So it
So do you
says
think,
major,
Elaine, do
yeah,
you think the founders of the United States read those histories?
Well, that's what, I'm not to that part of the book, but I'm assuming they did.
Yeah, I'm thinking so
They did. Because during the history of the 1260, they were reading, and this is
too.
what influenced people like Hobbes and Locke.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
also it would be informing both sides, if that makes sense. So
And
depending on your
that's
mind
There
is
is
yeah, and
what it,
that's who the Federalists quote all the time.
yes, yes. So it says that major political thinkers in the 17th century, among them, it's got Hugo Grotius, Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, would use Roman language to debate sovereignty and treason, rebellion and revolution. So that is what later then influences like Thomas Jefferson as you go forward. So 100, let me check out which one that one was. I tried to do this in a rush, so I apologize if it's a little disorganized. Um,
No
in the book,
yeah,
worries.
guys. It's really
Thanks for
good.
stepping up.
yeah.
It's really good.
So Rome's historians and poets kept alive the memory of the wars of Sulla and Marius, Pompey and Caesar, but more recent history across Northern Europe especially also sustained the memory of those earlier moments. In the 1640s and 1650s, an avalanche of writings, many in translation about past civil wars, in Rome, but also in France, England, and Spain, were published to help Britons make sense of their own troubles. So in the 1600s, they're looking back at these poets and historians and things that they wrote. And just to give you a piece of a poet, if that was written back on Rome. Intestine strife, this is from a poem. Intestine strife is fearful most of all. This makes the son to cut his father's throat. This parteth friends. This brothers make so brow. This robs the good and sets the thieves afloat. This Rome did feel. This Germany did taste, and oftentimes this noble land did waste. So they were very poetic about what was going on and looking at civil wars, even though civil wars was something that was a struggle to define. The first, as I mentioned beginning, the first place it was used was in the Iron Kingdom in Rome, and going from a republic to transition into a monarchy. So I think it was Susan that asked the question, do I think that they do something to cause this, agitate it? And I believe from what I've read that they do agitate it because the people have rights and they don't want the people to have rights. They want to return to monarchy. And what I have come to view as possibly the understanding of a revolution is when they don't have rights, then you see in the history of the 1800s in the revolution to turn it back over to a republic. So
So
those are,
Elaine,
yeah,
would you say then revolution would be so I'm trying Civil War internal, but still ideology, and then revolution, would that be like a regime change or a power change to go from one form to another?
I'm not finished with the book yet. And
Oh,
like I said, it covers three sections. It covers Rome, then it covers the history of basically what would say is 1260 and heading into the revolutions. And then I
yeah.
think it's going to cover current time. So, but what I surmise so far is there is a distinction between Civil War, and he actually gives a definition. I don't have that marked, or I don't remember where it's at, but he gives a distinction that Civil War is looking back and revolution is looking forward. And so Civil War,
Say that, repeat it because it helps to ingrain it. Say that
yeah,
again.
Civil War, and I'll try to find a quote to add it to the notes eventually. But the Civil War more so looks back, and revolution is looking forward. So you have
And the
the
revolution is the ones in power, we were saying, in this context. And the
Revolution, if you look
civil
at
is the people, the public.
if you look at revolutions in like the French Revolution, look at what they were doing. They were
Yeah.
under a monarchy and they were fighting for human rights. So
Yeah,
when
And so
you're
that's
they
under,
wanted to get rid of the monarchy, which is a
right,
that's
so
right.
regime change.
right. So when you're
And that's
yes,
what
so when you're in a republic, then the nobility doesn't have the power that they want, and they would agitate or and eventually bring about civil war because
can
their
I
goal is
say,
to get back
um,
over to both. I
sorry,
think are seeking for a regime change. Go ahead, Susan.
thank you, Elaine. When
Yeah,
you said that the I was trying to use that one phrase you used, but now I can't remember how you exactly said it. But that the I'll just say aristocracy. I don't know who we're talking about as the elite, but the elite, let's just say, that
yeah,
have the power and the breeding, right? That believe that they're and the money, old money that's passed through families, right? Um, they're always in charge. As I'm looking at, and that's kind of a, you have to understand what I mean by that, because they don't act, let's say, like they're in charge always, but they are so wealthy that they have ways of maneuvering the powers they want because they are always wanting to stay wealthy and get wealthier. And so they have you look back, they have spies, they keep an eye, they do a lot of shenanigans to stop. And if people are gathering someplace and they're talking about it, right, they'll have spies that go into that pub and listen and blah blah blah. So they have always wanted to maintain the power, and that has never left them. Sort of like we've learned that the Puritans, they came with that kind of ideology here, and the slave traders came with their kind of ideology here. And even though we weren't excuse me, in a dispensation of excuse me, even though we weren't in a dispensation that showed that particular power, um, they always have wanted to maintain control all the way up to today. And the choices we have for our elections, because it's always a
Okay.
duopoly, it's always a two-party. Are there random third parties? Yes, but if you vote for that random third party, it's going to cut into in the duopoly. One of those two is that you don't want is going to get the power because you vote for a third party. It takes your vote away from the other person. So even the corporations like today, because the Democrats, if you look back, they also, right? Because the lobbyists that go in there and blah, blah, blah. And so the Democrats are just as guilty, and the Democrats are beholding more to the corporations, and corporations can be an individual. Corporations pay taxes as an individual. That's how they're looked at, just like us. And the other side has also with the billionaires or whatever, right? So it's always put up there as if we have a choice, but those choices have been vetted because corporations, to make money long term, they have to have stable government, stable monetary systems, because they don't make when they make an investment or whatever, it's a long term goal for them to receive their money back. They don't get it immediately like some investors that invest in other things. So they need a stable economy so that they know how much to buy, blah, 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 right? How much inventory, blah, blah, blah is going to be needed. And anyhow, this seems like it's something that has gone back from the very beginning. and just has developed, into these different ways. They've developed their
Yes.
ideology.
Thank you. And Satan is trying to perfect his kingdom, so keep that in mind as well. Jackie, one
Yes.
second. Let me make one point, and then Jackie has her hand up. Speaking of why or possible motive, as civil rights for plebeians increased, so as they get more rights during the Middle and Late Roman Republic, many plebeian families had attained wealth and power. So when you have this, is that where you use the word egalitarian? I hope I use the right words. um, that as they
Equal.
increased wealth, then that is what the nobility did not want to have happen, because they would become more powerful. So the nobility has to always keep the common people down. So first Jackie, then Kathy.
Yes, thank you, Elaine. Susan's comments too kind of strike my thought here with a question, because she mentioned old money, which is kept in the family of the hierarchy. And those are the fewer of the people, of course, and they're the ones that can rise to the top and control the people down underneath them. But what about the people, and there are those that raise themselves up by their own bootstraps? And this is people that are hard workers that rise to the top because of their hard work. And of course, the Republicans always have that saying, well, you rise up by your own, by pulling yourself up by your own bootstraps. And in reflecting on that, then they say, well, if people don't do that, they have the right, they could do it. Everyone could do it.
But they're
So,
officially saying that, Jackie, because they didn't pull themselves up by their bootstraps, and they had help. Also, they had different help, but they read people like I can't think of his name. It's a Trump loves him. It's almost his. He grew up with him. Peele, Norman Vincent Peale. I forget the name of the book, but it's about prosperity. And they believe, they get in their mind
The
that they have
power of
done it.
positive thinking, Susan.
Say that again, Kathy.
The power of positive thinking.
Thank you. That's it. And
yeah,
so they've developed like this because it makes them feel even more powerful, and that they have done this thing. And look at me, like Babylon, look at me, this great kingdom I have built. It makes them very selfish, self-centered, and they don't recognize the help that they actually received. And so therefore they want to make other people feel like, yeah, you could do it too if you worked hard enough. But they aren't telling you all the truth. They leave details out, right? And they're like Darwinians because they believe that they're the fittest and they believe they're the best. And so if they're the fittest and the best, then they're entitled to rule, right? They believe they are entitled to rule. So,
yeah, it's a good point. I'm seeing it more in light of individuals that can rise higher, if they put it that way. Well, I did it because I put my whole heart and soul into it. And I did pull myself up by my own bootstraps. And I see it as that could be something that people pat themselves on the back and make themselves feel more above others, for sure.
how
But
many
it
of
can,
those are there, though, when you think about it? Because they will use an example of someone who maybe has done what you are sharing with us, and I know what you're talking about, but it's kind of like they build a myth around it and elevate that, sort of like the American Dream idea, or
yeah,
that famous movie star. She was just discovered at a soda shop, and they build this, even though that might not have been even how, but right, or parts of it are truth, but they spin this beautiful story so that other people dream about that and think that they will also have that opportunity, and they'll be busy looking at that, and it takes their eyes off the ones who really had it all anyway, if that makes sense.
Yeah, because I see the ones with the old money, so to speak, the ones that are on the top, like Musk and who is on the top. I mean, did he gain all of that money by himself? Or
No,
was that old
he was
money?
wealthy. His father had what, emerald mines? He grew up in South Africa. He
Yeah,
came from money, just like Trump.
yeah.
Trump wasn't broke. He was born into a privileged family. You
Yes,
know,
exactly.
So Kathy, did you still have a comment?
Yes, I think I can remember my question. And maybe you've already mentioned it because I missed it because of my computer, or maybe you haven't read it yet in the book. But you mentioned that he defines revolutions as looking forward and civil wars as looking back. And does he then tell or explain what the United States Civil War was looking back to?
And like I said, I'm not there yet.
Okay.
Uh, I'm not there yet. So,
It
and
seems like
this,
they would be looking
question,
forward.
Kathy. Don't
yeah,
forget
Pardon?
that question.
this comment down here, kind of touches on that, but I want to read a little thing off of page 99 real quick. Historians have hotly debated whether books made revolutions. So remember, you're in the Enlightenment period, right? Whether books made revolutions in the 17th and 18th centuries, but there is little doubt that civil wars made books. So, and
I don't
this
know. Have you been to the history section in the bookstore?
so there's all now, but the revolutions, and if you remember, Elder Perminder asked the question, why did the revolutions fail? So, and that was kind of one of the reasons that I continued to stir down this direction.
Well,
And
I'm in the same direction, Elaine, except I'm going back to the American Revolution
good.
and the French. Yeah. So
So,
I'm really fascinated by your study because it's really helping, in what I've been reading to kind of, see the different views and that's why it's sparking all the questions for me.
no, no problem. No problem.
Yeah, I'm loving it too, Elaine. And you've made it so clear. Wow. And it really threads through and helps us see clearer. So thank you.
Yeah, and keep in mind as we go through this that Babylon is that great city, also that Rome comes in two parts and the United States comes in two parts. So, and Rome came in the part of a republic and then back to an empire, and the United States is a republic and goes back to an empire, whatever form it looks like. That's where they want to head. So from page 116, what more than all these histories could be needed to demonstrate that it was monarchy that bred war and republicanism that brought peace. Now, because you have the bias of the different writers, historians, and poets, and some argue that it is republicanism that brings war, and it's the monarchy that brings peace.
So there's
So
the information war.
yes, there's the information war. So the monarchy, when it's a republic, the monarchy is fighting to get it back to a monarchy. And so I believe they actually instigate that.
Yeah, they would need to so that they could say they
Yes.
could put a
And if
kibosh
the
on
and
it.
if left to go on, then the plebeians, so in this history, would become wealthy, and that would be a threat. So you have to keep the threat down. And when you let the common people come into the world of being able to have a equal economy, equal opportunity or what have you economy, then it's a threat to their power. And then page 117, all monarchies are subject to be afflicted with civil wars, but commonwealths are less troubled with those distempers. The Roman Republic, the period when neither kings nor emperors ruled the Roman people, was the best illustration of that correlation. So it argues, these poets and historians argue from both sides. So if you do get the book and read it, that's where I'm challenged. But you understand that the ones on the monarchy are saying that monarchy is where you find peace, and the republic is what causes war.
Well, isn't the monarchy patriarchal and protective?
Yes, that's in there too. Yeah, I don't think I'll get there, but yes, I have a Wikipedia page open that shows how patriarchal it is as well.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's a great point, because a lot of people didn't see that with Queen Elizabeth, right? Because she was a woman.
Matriarchal.
But it was a patriarchal system, hierarchical system, the way it was set up. That's right.
So then this comment here from page 118, it was not adherence to a republican constitution that caused Rome's seditions and ultimately its civil wars. It was straying from that constitution. So you could look at it from both sides. We know which side we're seeing, which I believe we're going to see which side is correct. The one that the kingdom is designed, the king is created to do good. But when you have the two different ideologies, or Satan's ideology is how I look at it, that is not going to allow the citizens to have that rule, that republic, the constitution, a government for and of the people and by the people. Can't have that, because that's going to be a threat to the nobility and their power and their wealth and their control.
Isn't that sad how they blind and fool people to allow them to do that too?
Yeah, and that's what's interesting in this, how I got it. It's a behind the scenes thing, deceptive. I think I said it at the very beginning. It's behind the scenes and deceptive. So you can actually get the citizens to be on the side of monarchy without really realizing, because of the ideas that they throw out that deceive the people to where they actually participate in bringing back the monarchy and don't even see where they were headed.
It kind of reminds me of the Stockholm syndrome in a wild way. The Stockholm syndrome, the girl that was kidnapped by that guy, I believe it was in Stockholm. I don't have all the details in my
Yeah, that
memory.
was it. She became attached to her kidnapper.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She ended up over time. And that is so profound, because that fits for women who are afraid to leave abusive husbands.
Mm-hmm.
And you take that, you run that thread down, and it's always the same. And it goes back to that mind upon mind influence, what you believe, and how the abuser will break the person down inside. Call you fat, or you look fat in that, even if they're nice, even if they say it in a nice way, it's a backhanded compliment, so that you're in your head, you walk away going, oh, does this look like, it makes you self-conscious aware, or you make a comment and they'll say, oh, that's so stupid, or whatever, until they finally have you believing that, and that you would never make it without this person. Right. And so that's why so many of them are afraid to leave, because they're so strapped in so many ways under the control of the abuser. And you also have the enablers around the abuser that make it, right? And society does that. Society's like, oh, he's so nice. Why would you leave him? He's such a good provider, right? But you can see the thread of all of this. It's abusers. They're abusers. The aristocracy, that's how they get people into line, and making away many with peace, the way Trump has been doing, all the way down to where they made the FIFA. Did you see where they just, because he wanted the Nobel Peace Prize, right? And he was flying around trying to, you guys were in France during that. And there was big banners saying Trump and peace. And it made me think of how Rome makes away many by peace. in Daniel. But it's just, anyway, it's just so, there was one final point and I forgot it. I'm sorry. But anyway, thank you.
So, Elaine, your point in the deception of the people to me is like a universal principle for every nation, every country, in that there's myth, history, poets on both sides giving their narrative.
Yeah, and there's one, and I couldn't find the page. I had him noted, but I didn't find him on the page that I was looking at. This guy here, that
So
he.
the
Go ahead.
people are led, and it could be through ignorance, family tradition, or you know what I mean? So it's like if you don't
Exactly.
sift, if you don't sift both,
Yes, yes,
um, so I think that's like, doesn't that, to me, it looks like now that's the global warfare, right? From the get-go. I
yes,
mean, in heaven, that's what Satan pretty much was doing, gathering people and the angels on his side, giving a narrative that was against Jesus, against God. And they fell for it because of their relationship with Satan.
yes. It was part of my thought process this morning as I was trying to pull this together quickly. That Elder Tess's studies on the importance of being able to sift everything, because you have to be able to determine their bias to which they're talking about. And this guy, I can't find the page. Oh, I have it on 128. That's where he is. Okay, I have the wrong page. Vittel, let me just read a. I'm going to read two things here that. Let me read the first one first, touch on the first point you meant. And it's hard to do this without giving context
Right.
in the passage that I'm going to read. But this is in the 1600s. It's after the British constitutional crisis of 1640 and 41 broke out in armed arrays across England. The strife was often seen in light of the Dutch and French civil wars and as a continuation of English strife in the 13th and 15th centuries. To take one prominent example, John I don't know if it's Corbett or Corbett, historian of the English city of Gloucester, declared the stakes in 1643 to be even higher than those in prior disputes. And this is what he said. The action of these times transcends the Barons' Wars and the tedious discords between the houses of York and Lancaster, inasmuch as it is undertaken upon higher principles and carried on to a nobler end and effects more universal. You've used
Can
the
you
word
read that last
universal.
line about as it affects
Yeah,
that last line?
as it is undertaken upon higher principles and carried on to a nobler end and effects more universal. Um,
And
that
who
part
is
caught my
that?
attention.
Who
Huh?
who who is that directed to, that passage? Because I can't see it.
They're discussing the history of 1640 to 41, the constitutional crisis of the British, and then going and looking at the Dutch and French civil wars, and then the English strife in the 13th and 15th centuries. And it's basically saying that these civil wars in these areas and the constitutional crisis, that it is as it is undertaken upon higher principles. This is what this guy is stating, John Corbett, as it is undertaken upon higher principles and carried on to a nobler end and effects more universal. The whole Enlightenment period brought out a lot of these poets and historians when they were trying to understand their own history, their own current and some past history, but they were going back to these poets and historians of Rome to be able to better understand what was happening to them, which we are now in our history looking back at the history of the French Revolution and the American Revolution. And then they actually, in that history, went back and looked at Rome, if that made sense.
Yeah,
So
that's
they're
really
looking at,
good. It does make sense. And you mentioned also that the barons, there were skirmishes between the different. So it's kind of like it's happening at the same time, simultaneously. But that upper class, they go through their own upheaval, so that the person who is going to be the monarch or whatever rises kind of the top. It sounds like they go through their own power struggles to have the one that's the richest or whatever.
And the hard part is the
Does that
deception
make
is always
sense?
done. Yeah.
Is that right? What I'm
Um,
seeing?
So I don't know if it's right or wrong. I mean, to me, it's a matter of here sharing some of these thoughts and these ideas that they have and understanding that it's done very deceptively so that people can become convinced that a monarchy is actually better than a republic. And it's done under the guise of deception. So I found the one that I was looking for, Vattel, if that's his name. He was a great innovator in modern conceptions of civil war. He was a Swiss writer, Emmer de Vattel. He was 1714 to 1767. Little known today except by scholars. He was, for almost a century, probably the most influential contemporary legal thinker in the world. Vattel was born in the Swiss canton of, I can't read that, sorry, don't read the word, and aspired to a diplomatic position. He had been thoroughly schooled in what contemporaries knew as the law of nature and nations. That is, the intellectual tradition originating ultimately in Roman law and philosophy that treats the norms governing the behavior of individuals and states as being inherent in the rational nature of humans themselves. It goes on, there's a few pages that talks about him, and it goes on to say that, and this is where it gets complicated for me, that people could use his writings to defend both sides of the argument. And that's why the sifting is so important to understand. But it goes on as well. The book secured him, he wrote The Law of Nations in 1758. The book secured him political preferment from the Elector of Saxony. It also put him on the map as a great legal authority, not least for the use Thomas Jefferson and others made of his work when writing the Declaration of Independence. The subject of Vattel's Law of Nations was what he would now call international law. So what I've gathered so far is this takes you from Rome, the battles in Rome, because I'm going to have to wrap it up. The battles in Rome, where Rome actually marched on Rome, you had a republic that is established that's allowing the common people to have rights, and within those rights they can eventually build wealth. They become a threat to the nobility. The nobility doesn't want them to have rights. And then you have the historians and the poets that are going to write from both sides of this, based on their own bias to defend or deny. So one argues that monarchy is what brings peace, and the republicanism is what brings war. And the other flip side of that argument is that the republicanism is where you find peace, and monarchies are what brings war. I think that's left for us to look at our own history and to form our conclusions. Go ahead, Kathy.
So then the reason they don't want the people to have rights is because they gained wealth, is what you said at one point?
That's one of the things that's mentioned. I'm sure there's more
Yes.
to it than that, but it makes
So
me.
it's interesting because the people generally that are in power have wealth. And therefore, it's not only that they don't want the masses to have wealth, they don't want them to have power.
Yes.
And and there's this desire to have a controlled power group. So I see that clearly. Yeah.
Kind of interesting if you have the bias, or if you're biased towards republicanism and you gain wealth, then you're going to have power to stand for rights. Does that make sense?
And if you have wealth, most of the people in the Senate in the time of Rome bought votes.
Yeah.
And so if you get wealth, that means you can maybe outbid
Control.
the
Yep.
vote.
Yes.
And those people that are in could be out. So they don't want to lose that power.
And that's why they like the uneducated. Trump's famous line. That's why they pull the books. That's why they
Yes.
are doing what they can to erase history. I mean, I think what's her name? I can't. One of those speakers for Trump that went before the committee before she went or anyway, it was one of them or the one that went to file the papers and was not the right attorney. I can't remember her name, that filed that stupid lawsuit, and she wasn't even, she was just like a real estate attorney. She was the famous museum, there. What's it called?
Smithsonian.
Yes, before Trump grabbed her to do that assignment, she was in there erasing history. And that's what they like to do. And that's why you see the intellectuals have been outcasted in our society. Many of the intellectuals and many of the ones like, that have left, like Jason Stanley. I can't think of all the names. There's a lot of them, different people that were blowing the siren about fascism way long before. And they're under attack in so many ways that they actually, now their families get doxxed, they get threats, death threats, and many of them are like more afraid for their family by speaking out. And so it's gotten rid of these people from the United States. They've left. And you can see that. They just don't want people to know. And so these false narratives keep people stupid and controllable.
So Donna has her hand up, and I want to try to get a few closing thoughts, but we'll see. Go ahead, Donna.
Yes, hi, happy Sabbath, everybody. Thank you, Elaine. I'm really enjoying this study. And
We're
thank you.
really scraping the surface.
Yeah, it really is. And I think it's appropriate for this time. But I just want to make a comment about the monarchy. I remember reading a book, and it was called Unhuman. It was written by Jack Posobiec, and he's a far right supporter of Trump. And he really talked a lot about monarchy. I mean, that's the end game is monarchy. And, it was highly regarded by Trump Jr. and J.D. Vance and all these, people who have a lot of power. And it really is like how Kathy talked about power. It really is the goal is about power. So I just, it just brought to mind when all of you were talking. I appreciate all the input, Susan's input and Kathy's input. And I'm not sure, but I think maybe Victoria had an input, but maybe, I don't know what happened. But anyway, thank you so much. And I appreciate this conversation.
Sure, no problem. And I appreciate everybody's comments as well. Going just to touch on crossing the Rubicon, that phrase where they get to Caesar goes and marches against Rome, and the river was this marking point that was considered the symbol of a point of no return. His crossing the historical event is the historical event that the modern idiom crossing the Rubicon comes from, meaning to pass the point of no return. So this is Caesar in 49, and then you're working your way towards the Battle of Actium. So it was a declaration of war. Crossing the Rubicon with an army was an act of insurrection and a declaration of war against Rome. Then you come to the Battle of Actium, where it's now, you've got Octavian is now going to be the Emperor Augustus. And this now takes you into the time in 4 BC when Christ is born. So Rome transitioned from a republic to an empire after power shifted away from representative democracy to a centralized imperial authority, with the emperor holding the most power. Then the next step that I went through was, and we're going to just run across this surface and you could look it up. I'll share the notes so you'll have the links to look at. But what was going through my mind as I was reading this book is the two-party system. And I had remembered that there were those that argued against and warned against the two-party system, and Washington was one of them. When Washington stepped aside as president in 1796, he memorably warned in his farewell address of the divisive influence of factions on the workings of democracy. The common and continual mischiefs of the spirit of party are sufficient to make it the interest and duty of a wise people to discourage and restrain against it. He had stayed on for a second term only to keep these two parties from warring with each other. He was afraid of what he called disunion, that if the parties flourished and they kept fighting each other, that the union would break up. So these two parties, though, are those two parties that are going to argue with their own biases. And like I said, it's very deceptive to this, what seems to be this goal to reach back to monarchy or empire. I hope
And
that was.
it reminds me of like the legal system. I had to go through the legal system for many different things. And what you'll notice, and most of you might already know this, but what you'll notice is that when they're in court and you have the district attorney and the other attorney that's defending, right, the accused or whatever, they act like they are so against each other. But these people all run in the same circles. They're all friends. Maybe not the closest of friends, but if you think of the funerals, we see all the presidents. You know, Dick Cheney was a horrible person, but you see both sides there represented. They all interact amongst each other, even though it's made to look like they are, against each other. So I see that with this also, that, and that's the biggest problem, because they're all elites in a way, both on both sides of the party, right? They have the power, they like the control, right? But they all run in the same circles, eat at the same restaurants, go to each other's weddings. Look at the Epstein files. Look at they're all hang out together.
Elaine,
We know that both sides failed. Go ahead.
who was Washington referring to?
Oh, in
And
this comment up here,
yeah.
I don't have time to go into it
Wasn't
now.
it the Whigs?
This was, I don't have the history in front of me. You're going to have to add to that when you do your history of the American Revolution, if you would, if you're able to include that in. He was warning overall between Adams and Jefferson, I believe, if I remember right. But they had two different views that were coming in, and it was creating this distinction. And one was going to fight for the people, and one was going to fight for the nobility. And that's how I see it. I might be wrong, but the one was going to fight for what comes. And eventually, because you have slavery here at the time already, and that's where you look at this as, is it a bad nation? Is the Sixth Kingdom bad? It's a kingdom that was a lamb, a baby, and was allowed. If you take what Elder Parmenter talked about, Bunyan, how he took Pilgrim's Progress and he personified everything. If you personify the United States, you make it out as a person, as a lamb, it's a baby and needs time to grow and learn and become what its purpose was. And we know that it fails in its purpose. So I don't have the actual answer, Kathy, at this time anyways. Maybe next time if I can, I'll probably continue this because I have a lot more to go on. I'm sorry.
Well, I think just the little bit I've looked into, it was basically the Federalists, because George Washington was a Federalist.
Yeah.
and he was extremely wealthy.
Yes. And slaves.
Well, what's
And
good about that too, though, Kathy, is that they wanted him to run again, but he had the wherewithal to realize, nuh-uh, he stepped away.
well, I think that is a nice myth
Good. Tell
because,
me more. Tell me more.
well, there's the Federalists and the Republicans. The Federalists called the people who opposed powerful central government as anti-federalists to give them a negative name, like they're bad. But it's actually a narrative that it was the people who opposed the strong civil government, um, like John Hancock, Patrick Henry, Jefferson, and it was for the people with a small limited government, but it was based on the states. So it's really a fascinating study, and I feel like Elaine and I are like this parallel study of time periods, but we're
Not on
still
purpose.
we're in the right direction. We're headed in the
Not
same
on purpose.
direction. No, I know it. It's not on purpose. But I find it interesting that based on your study, Elaine, and then the little bit I've been doing is how they will have their bias. And to me, it sounds like Washington was protecting himself. And
Oh, that's very interesting.
that Federalist wealthy group, small group of men, white wealthy men, and to put a narrative out there that those other people are making it nasty. Just, throwing
Yes.
that out.
Yes, I get the point you're making. I get the point
Yeah.
you're making that his not wanting the two-party system was
Yes.
going to go against the nobility, and he wanted to
Yeah.
defend the nobility. Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah, because
Yeah.
they knew these histories,
Yeah.
and they
The neat
knew
thing
what would break
is,
it up. So
and
if you bring in this other party spirit, it's going
mm-hmm.
to stir the people to want their rights and become what it is. It's interesting to take that. I don't know how to describe it, but like a twist you have to sift the biases, and I'm not good at it. You know what I'm saying? You
Yeah.
have to sift the biases, and so that point you bring up is really, I think, explains this even more. That why Washington made that comment that he did. I get that
Yeah.
now. It
Yeah.
says, just to read this one, while the Federalists would never win another presidential election and disappeared for good after the War of 1812, the two-party system revived itself with the rise of Andrew Jackson's Democratic Party by the 1830s and firmly solidified in the 50s after the founding of the Republican Party. Though the party's identities and regional identifications would shift greatly over time, the two-party system we know today had fallen into place by 1860. And remember what was going on. There's people fighting against slavery and there's people defending slavery. Even as the nation stood poised on the brink of the Civil War that Washington and the other founding fathers had desperately wanted to avoid. So it is very complicated. And
Mm-hmm.
what do we know from Elder Parmenter study? How to not be seduced? You definitely have to be able to sift. And it takes, to me, it takes comprehension that have always struggled with comprehending. But I thank Kathy for bringing out that point that he was arguing on the side of the nobility, didn't want that two-party system because it's going to bring in ideas.
And Elaine, the
Interesting.
Federalists, the Federalists, the only president they came out of power in 1801. Only two Federalists were elected president, Washington and John Adams. And after that, it was no more Federalists.
So you
So
saw
that says something.
the people were
That's
fighting for rights.
yes,
Yes,
yes. And
yes,
but remember the things that Jefferson was a Republican / anti-federalist, but he signed the Insurrection Act of 1807 just before he left his presidency. He never invoked it. But it's these laws that are now being used constitutionally by Trump. And he's not the only president. JFK did it a couple times. Lyndon Johnson used it for the desegregation and all that. But they can manipulate what the emergency is. And that's what Jefferson, he was afraid. And so he signed that thing, and that's now the heritage. It's in that early history that can be now used in the Seventh Kingdom.
Yeah. And if you look at this history here that we're looking at with the founding fathers, they're watching what's going on in Europe. They're fully aware of the Enlightenment period and how that spread ideas that helps develop this party that's going to stand for people's rights. So they're aware of that history, and they're also aware from all the historians and poets of what happened in Rome. So they
So
know
what
how
were
to.
they? Does your author say why Washington and the founding fathers
Not
wanted
there
to
yet.
avoid the Civil War?
Yeah, not there yet. So I'll
Was
let
it
you
because
know.
they were enslavers?
Well, probably.
Think about it.
Yeah, probably.
They
They don't
had
want to.
slaves, and the slaves were called property. The pursuit
Yes,
of life, liberty, and property.
yes,
And they meant human beings, not just
yes,
land.
yes. So
Yeah.
closing, I just refer back to what happened because when you look at the history of Israel, when you went through the time of the judges, what did the people want when Samuel was old and his sons weren't good, I guess to say. And the people are asking for a king, and God tells Samuel, go show him the manner of the king. And the manner of the king was that they're not going to protect the people. The king doesn't protect the rights of the people, and that's what he basically gives them in that rundown. And then they asked anyways, give us a king. So they go through this period of the kings. Their kingdom eventually fails, and they get scattered into Babylon or conquered by Babylon. Whereas Babylon is the head of gold, there must be some value, and that's for another study. There must be some value that God saw that they could go into that kingdom and be under protection, but also, while under affliction, could remember their past and know what is right. So that's all I can do for now because we're out of time. But there's a whole lot more to this that I think it applies to. We can see those histories repeating, looking at the Iron Kingdom, because if Rome is the Iron Kingdom, or the Iron Kingdom is the final kingdom all the way till the end, then it's still an Iron Kingdom. It's just the United States and not Rome. I hope I don't know if that's right, but that's how I see it. Maybe Elder Parmenter already said that. I don't remember. But so.
It's fantastic, Elaine. Thank you. Very stimulating.
Oh, good. Ideas. So we'll go ahead and close in prayer. Almighty God in heaven, we thank you for your goodness and your mercy, your watch care, your guidance, and your direction. As we grapple with the light in this message, in this movement, may you continue to bless, guide, and direct us, that we could come to, as we share our different ideas and different understandings, that we come together and work through them, and that the truth would rise to the top, and that there would be perfect unity, and that each one of us would stand in faith of your kingdom and serve your kingdom on earth as it is in heaven. Lord, we pray for continued understanding and wisdom. We thank you for the blessing of the Sabbath, the blessing of fellowship, and the blessing and privilege to be able to be in this movement and study from around the world together. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.